Salts. A salt is generally formed during the neutralization reaction. What is neutralization reaction now? A reaction in which an acid reacts with a base to form salt and water is called neutralization. So always remember that a salt is made up of two radicals, positive radical and a negative radical. The positive radical comes from the base, whereas the negative radical comes from an acid. Let's consider one example. If we have base sodium hydroxide, that is NaOH, it reacts with acid hydrochloric acid, that is HCl. Now the positive radical from the base is Na plus and the negative radical in the acid is Cl minus. So both of them react together to form the salt, that is NaCl, and water is also formed during the reaction. So it is clear that a salt is made up of two radicals, positive and negative. Positive comes from the base and negative comes from the acid. Now when we take some more examples of salt, we will find that certain salts belong to the same family. How do we decide a family of the salt? If we have sodium chloride belongs to two families. It belongs to sodium salts family and chloride salts family. Similarly, if we take calcium chloride, this salt comes from calcium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid. This salt is made up of positive calcium and negative chlorine. The family of this salt is calcium family and chloride family. So, in some way, sodium chloride and calcium chloride belong to the same chloride family. Similarly, if we take the example of copper sulfate. Copper sulfate comes from copper hydroxide and sulfuric acid. It belongs to two families, copper family and sulfate family. Now let us take 3 beakers of salt solution. In the first beaker we have sodium chloride solution. Second beaker has copper sulfate solution and the third beaker has sodium carbonate solution. Now let's check the pH of each solution. We find that sodium chloride's pH is 7. Copper sulfate's pH is less than 7 and sodium carbonate's pH is more than 7. That means sodium chloride is a neutral salt. Copper sulfate is an acidic salt, whereas sodium carbonate is a basic salt. What could be the reason behind this? Okay, any salt which comes from a strong acid and a strong base will be a neutral salt. If a salt is made up of a strong acid and weak base, it will be an acidic salt. And if a salt is made up of a strong base and weak acid, it will be a basic salt. When we check NaCl, sodium chloride comes from sodium hydroxide and HCl, that is hydrochloric acid. Both are strong. Sodium hydroxide is a strong base, whereas hydrochloric acid is a strong acid. So they form a neutral salt, that is NaCl. When we check copper sulfate is an acidic salt because it comes from copper hydroxide and sulfuric acid. Copper hydroxide is a weak base, whereas sulfuric acid is a strong acid. So, they form an acidic salt, that is copper sulfate. When we check sodium carbonate, it is made up of sodium hydroxide, a strong base, and carbonic acid, which is weak acid. So, they form a basic salt. So, this is how we identify the pH of the salt depending upon which acid or which base they are made up of.